And we're live. Thanks everybody for joining for a new webinar. This is our 8th week of webinars. We've been doing webinars every day for the past 8 weeks at Mix with the Masters. There's a lot of familiar names. You guys have been tuning in, and we've been talking about production, mixing, recording. Also, we had some artists and bands showing up and explaining their process, but we're really, really proud and honored to welcome two very special guests today for you guys to share their knowledge with us. We have the amazing mastering engineer Bernie Grundman and Mike Buzzy, who join us and here to answer some of your questions. How are you guys?
Great.
Very good.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time to connect and answer a few questions from the audience.
Our pleasure. I already did my webinar earlier, so I'm kind of acting as interviewer to my boss, Bernie Grundman, who doesn't need much of an introduction. So I'm going to read the questions, and we'll see what he's got to say. Get right into it.
First, well, I hope there is some kind of insight that I might have. However, we do a lot of these things, so hopefully, yeah, there'll be something that'll kind of stimulate the audience.
All right. Well, here's your first question. You ready?
Okay. Okay.
All right. Connor Wallace. Hello, Bernie. Thanks a lot for doing this. What has been your most challenging project and why? Greetings from Spain.
Yeah. Well, we'd have to go back a ways when it comes to the most challenging one. And sometimes it's not so much kind of what my own challenge. It's has a lot to do with trying to give the client what they're looking for, and that kind of communication process, that way of kind of finding the right direction, sometimes can be really confusing, because a lot of clients and a lot of artists, producers, or whatever, sometimes don't know how to describe what they're hearing or what they want to hear or what they feel is missing. And of course, as a mastering engineer, my job is to try to get them what they want, and try to find that magic area that really does something positive for their tune or for their piece of music, but really helps them realize their dream. You know, that's what we're really doing here. We're trying to really help the client realize their dream. Now, we might have a lot of ideas on what would take it in a good direction, and what we feel from our experience, what would be really something to improve the experience of that tune. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to stimulate people to get the message that they're talking about. You know, so we always need to get on the same wavelength. But then it comes down to trying to figure out, you know, how to manipulate the sound in such a way to give them even more of what they want or what they felt they didn't get in the mix. You know, they come in with all these questions. But I would say if we went back to some projects that were really difficult, I would say there was this one project with Beck, Midnight Vultures. Now, that was in the days of half-inch 30 IPS tape, and it took 3 months to master that job. Now, it wasn't every day, but it was like every other day or so, or every 3 days, but it was back and forth, and he had used 2 different studios, and it got so confusing that we even ended up, because he had worked at 2 different studios on the same tunes, but he liked certain parts of the tune from one studio and certain parts from a different studio. And it was our job to try to edit these half-inch 30 IPS tapes together, and then try to make it so that at the edit points that you couldn't hear the difference, but it was actually, the mix was changing in the right way for Beck. So this ended up being where some of those tunes, we had to do fast moves and so forth because we weren't using the computer as much. And we were like, we have double boards here. We can preset up EQ and so forth, and we could actually preset. It took two of us to do this, but we could preset the one board, and we could switch back and forth at edit points, right precisely at the edit point. And I mean, some of these tunes had as many as 17 moves also within the tune. We were actually changing EQ at marks on the tape. So this gets pretty tedious, and it gets to be one of those jobs that are really, to me, I kind of think it's interesting, and I enjoy it in some ways because it's a challenge. Can I really get through this? So there's been a few instances like that where you really are doing things in real time. Those days, just like the guys that used to work without a computer on the console, or they didn't have control, they had to do it by hand. They would have to memorize all the and put marks in the console and so forth. Those were the days when it was pretty tedious and and frustrating, because you make a mistake, you got to go back and start over again. And it's like in the days when they were mixing and they would edit all together all these pieces because they couldn't mix the whole tune in a row, the whole thing at one time. But yeah, there are jobs like that, like the Beck thing, and it's happened even on Fleetwood Mac, where it was back and forth and different changes. But these are usually the older projects. Now it doesn't happen as often. And we can also piecemeal it because of the computer. So with the computer, it is in many ways a lot easier. However, when it is originally a tape, and you're going to make a disc or something, you'd rather go from the tape and do those moves on the fly because the quality's better. I mean, let's face it, computers are a bit of a weak link in this whole thing. You're not going to get the same sound when you transfer the tape to the computer. It won't be as good. The quality will not be as good. It never is. But it's not that it's bad, but it's just not quite as good. So it depends on what you're looking for. If you don't care, fine, then it's faster.
All right. You ready for another one?
Sure, yeah.
You want some of your coffee?
I've had it. Hey, I just had my espresso, so I'm fine.
Bernie,
and you know how espresso is. It takes just a few seconds and it's over.
All right. Sorry. Zab Spencer. Hi, Bernie. You once mentioned that 400 hertz is a frequency with loads of energy. Are there any other frequencies that have similar issues? And is there a specific frequency that's pleasing to the ear?
Well, 400 are all in that area, 300, 400, and so forth. The thing is, it has a certain kind of energy, but you don't hear it a lot of times. You know, especially... this happens more in discs where you have like those vocal peaks and stuff that are slamming the meters. And it doesn't, you say, my God, the voice doesn't sound that loud though, but boy, these meters are going crazy. You know, so in the studio, most mixers, of course, compress that. But that area, 300, 400, and so forth, we use that a lot. We usually use that by dipping out, because those areas are areas that cloud the sound. It's not real, I don't call it real bottom, it's upper bottom or lower mids. But that area is kind of like a little bit dangerous, because if you have too much of that, it's going to cover up the mid-range and you're going to lose a lot of detail. If I even take out a little bit of 300 or 400 or something like that, usually it's around 300 for me. But if I take out a little 300, you would swear I added all kinds of top and detail to the recording, and I haven't. And the thing is, you can abstractly still maintain that same kind of bottom. Say you like the quantity of the bottom, but you have this boomy 300 cycles. And you don't want that droning thing that goes on with 300 cycles. You don't want that almost like it's humming at you all the time. Things are ringing at you. I think you want to tighten things up and make it a little clearer. So if you dip it out a little bit at 300, you can't go too far because you'll thin out the vocal and things like that. It depends on if you're able to do that. So you might have to do a combination of things. So you might want to dip it out at 300 to kind of open it up and clear it up and give it a little depth and so forth. But now you're missing bottom. So you just come up at 130 or something, or 150, or 50 even. It's almost like you're just moving the spectrum down. you still have the same quantity of bottom. You're still going to be satisfied that the balance is there, because that's the main thing. As a listener, you want to have a nice balance between the bottom has to be kind of supporting the amount of top you have and so forth. So to get the right kind of balance, you can just kind of abstractly move the bottom someplace else. And as long as it's not so low that average speakers can't reproduce it, except big sound systems. You have to do it in such a way that you're going to hear it on big systems and on smaller systems. But the main thing is that frequency. I think we all need T-shirts with a big circle and a line through it for 300 or something like that. That's what I.
No,
because it's kind of a rough area, and the stuff below it though is real bottom. I mean, you really feel it. This is just kind of rings at you. So it's kind of like and then on the other hand, it depends on what the mix is like. I've even added 300 because it's so thin in the mid range. The vocal is so thin that you have to add it. So I mean, you just do what you have to do, but there aren't any rules. It's like when you're EQing something and you want some air. So you go to a fairly high Q and you just put 10 dB on at 15K, say, and it gives you all kinds of air and spatial stuff, which is up there. And I've had in seminars people say, "Well, God, isn't that too much?" And I said, "What do you mean it's too much? How does it sound? That's all that counts. If it sounds good, if it's giving you a better experience of that music emotionally, you've got it."
Amen. Second part of that question: any frequencies that you find pleasing to your ears?
Well,
is there somewhere that you tend to go to?
Well, I do like upper frequencies because they bring out all the overtones and resonances and so forth, and all the little details that kind of enrich instruments. So I do tend to like up 10K and above even, to add a kind of like gloss to things, this airy kind of glossy spatial thing, because one of my beliefs is is that a piece of music, what you really are trying to do is you're trying to create an environment. And you want to have a place where this music resides that's almost like really private. So you want to transport that listener there. So you want to create a spatial environment, an actual place to go where that music is. And it's almost like it's a magical little area that you're trying to create. And if you can do that, and the best mixes are that way, I feel. Bruce Swedien was a master at that. Michael Jackson would be right in your face, but you could walk inside that mix. And it's like, I don't know how he did it, but that kind of sound, that way of creating space but still presence at the same time, that's the very best mixers do that. They know how to do it. Mick Guzowski does that. People like that. It's pretty magical. But that's what I actually try to add that in to a lot of mixes, because that's a lot of the stuff that gets lost, especially in the digital domain. That's a very subtle thing, the air and space and depth. And so that's a low-level frequency, level signal. And the thing that'll bring it out is high frequencies. It's like 10, 12, even 15K. It's just the bottom end of that curve, though. You can't really hear much above. You can hear maybe at 20,000, but there's not a lot of information up there. But you want to maybe put a lot of EQ up there, because you don't want, and you want it to be fairly low Q, so that it reaches down and kind of like highlights everything. But you don't want to have it digging into the 5K, these are mid-range. These are harsh frequencies, 3K, 5K. It's got a lot of edge, but then again, you've got to have some of that, because that's a lot of your presence. So again, it all comes down to a certain kind of balance. If you're going to be bright in the mid-range, you better be supporting it with bottom. It doesn't have to be on top of it, but it needs to be somewhere. And same way with the extreme top, way up top, so that thing, it might have presence, but at least it has kind of a place where, so you're getting the rest of the music as well.
All right. Peter Maxwell. Hi, Bernie. Would you say that going outside the box allows you to get a few extra dB of loudness into a master from such things as clipping, etc.? So
Well,
staying outside the box giving you more than working in the box.
well, no, I mean, in the box, I mean, well, you know, nowadays, I mean, if you're really looking for a lot of level, I think almost everything out there has clipping. But it's a very interesting thing about all this because, you know, I mean, the tendency is to think, well, God, you know, but that's distortion, and it's going to cause distortion. But you know, all of these things do. All of these processors cause distortion of a type. Even analog stuff. Compressors, there's a certain amount of loss there in the quality of the signal. And I mean, if you start out from the beginning and say, well, I'm not going to use any compressors or limiters or anything, I'm just going to make it loud. Well, I mean, sometimes that can actually sound pretty good. But all of your limiting, what you're doing is you're clipping everything. But the clipping is probably the fastest limiter in the world. You know, as long as you don't hear distortion, it could sound cleaner, punchier, more defined than any kind of processor or plug-in or and a compressor that you have on the board or in the computer. So now you have to make all those decisions. You have to decide now, hey, you know, what can I get away with? You know, maybe I can have a little bit of clipping in here because it's going to be still more transient. It's going to be more transient with the clipping because it's going to, in a sense, limit only the piece. No, there's no limiter that's that fast. You know, that's a processor, and I tend to like to avoid processors if I can in the computer domain. You know, plugins. It's sometimes they do really great things, but you know, let's get back to what we're really trying to do here. We're trying to really serve the music. We're really trying to make this music communicate emotionally. Now, and sometimes plugins are the best. So, you know, you just have to start experimenting. You know, it's a trial and error thing. It's just like mixing. You try things. If you feel that you can get more out of something, try a plugin. Now, a lot of the problems with plugins is that it makes everything sound the same. So that isn't necessarily wrong because there's nothing wrong in the pop music or in the pop music business. It's not that it's wrong because you're not only trying for quality. If you're in the audiophile business, which we do a lot of, then you don't want anything in it. You want natural. You want just the instruments and the quality of the sound. And it's usually for jazz or classical or things like that where it is only about the music. It's only about the sound of the instruments and so forth to enhance the music. But pop music is a manufactured device. It's something that's got all kinds of gimmicks in it and hyped up this, hyped up that in order to accentuate the rhythm or whatever you're doing. And so you need processors and you need various things that take a little of the quality away. So what I noticed, though, with all plugins is that everything takes on this other sound. It's like there's a little disease in there. You know, that every instrument, everything has this sound. Now, it makes it sound like it's actually more cohesive because everything sounds the same. It all has this affectation. So, and actually some people prefer that because I've actually done things that are much more open. They transients and stuff jump out at you more. You've got more dynamics that way. The presence of things and so forth. And then I've done exactly the same level through a processor, and they'll pick the processor because nothing distracts them. You know, it's like this mass of music is coming at you, and it's like there's nothing that kind of jumps out and almost sounds out of place. Whereas like if you're doing some kind of classical music and you have a crescendo, you want it to jump out at you. Well, they might not like that. They want it to be like just this mass of power. That's why a lot of even this rap stuff that we do is all mono practically. so that all of the sound is coming out of both speakers. So you've got maximum power all across the front of where you're listening to it. So it's it's all experience. It's all in learning. What people are looking for. What's a really great sounding this record, that record, this recording. And you're just trying to make it be that effective. Be as effective as the best thing you've ever heard.
Good answer.
Well, I mean, it sounds pretty good, doesn't it?
It does. All right. So getting away from some technical questions for a minute. These are my favorites. Stephen Pitkin. Hi, Bernie. Can you discuss one or two milestones from your career that were game changers for you?
Oh, well, let's see. Game changers. Well, I have to say that when I mastered Asia, that was impressive. It was kind of like there was a whole new kind of approach in a way. That's when we started getting into these real powerful kick drums and power in the drum system, drums, and the way the mixes were like very present, but they were really clean. They were quite good. I mean, and that tape, I think that tape was just a 15 IPS tape, but man, when I put that thing on, it was like, wow. Yeah, it just really jumped at me, and it was just really very, very effective. As time went on, things like that was the direction the industry started going in, because we used to be so careful with bottom end anyway. Way back in this, I've been in this a while, but way back, the cutting system, it was all on discs, all on vinyl. And the systems were not as sophisticated as they are now, and the computers that ran the cutting system were not as good. And so all of the mixers had to be careful with bottom end. You couldn't put too much bottom end. You couldn't make it too punchy, because it would be hard to cut the thing and make it so that the disc players would play them properly. So if you notice, a lot of the real old recordings are not really heavy on the bottom, because they were trying to be careful. But as time went on, especially when Bruce Swedien started really pushing things, like when he started getting into Off the Wall, it was really getting to be mainstream. All of this power in the bottom end, which is actually a very important part of the music, and it really did kind of liven things up. But I think Asia was one of the first times that I really noticed a big change. I mean, there's a lot of great recordings that I worked on, and some that were really phenomenal in the sound quality and all of that. But I think that as far as pop music and so forth, I think that was one of the first ones. And then Off the Wall was big too, and a lot of the things Bruce Swedien did were really excellent. They really and he would control so much of the stuff, and you wouldn't even know it. Like if I had a compilation to make, I would have one of his mixes, and all my meters would be reading low compared to what I had to do to the other tunes that were going to be in the compilation, because he had already cherry-picked all of the peaks and so forth, so that there was nothing that was. When you got to the point of clipping, that thing was loud. So, but you couldn't do it when you were putting it up next together, if you were making it into a compilation where it was going to be following some other tune. So a lot of the other tunes all around it would be reading really hot, but to make them all sound uniform, Swedien's would look low. So, but I mean, it's just, there's a lot of things you can do in mixing, especially when you're in this competitive world we're in now, where you do want things to kind of get people's attention. So they have to have a certain level if they're going to be played in succession. The thing about vinyl nowadays is that we don't have to worry as much about that. We can actually pull out a lot of that stuff and have it breathe a little more, because people, you're not really listening to one thing after the other in the same way. You're not listening on a playlist and so forth. You have to take all this time to put the record on, and you're actually now you're going through a certain silent period, And when you're paying attention to things and actually putting a record on, you're going to actually set the level where you want to hear it when the record comes on. So because you're actively involved. A lot of times the kids are not that involved. They have a playlist and it's just going, and they're working on their computer, or they're doing this or doing that. So it's kind of a different. Sometimes we even do 2 masterings, one for the disc and one for the commercial release, for the digital release.
All right. Here's another personal question.
Personal?
Well, not personal, but about one of your clients. Stephen Lopez. Hi, Bernie.
Yeah.
You've worked on Prince's music throughout his career. How has your approach to treating his songs evolved from his early work to the recent remasters? Also, he seemed somewhat unconcerned with the fidelity of his mixes. What were his thoughts on mastering?
Prince is one of the more unique people that I've ever worked with, because he almost never contributed anything to what he wanted me to do. I would do what I thought would work, and he might have a few comments, but whatever he mixed was pretty much what he wanted. I mean, he's unusual. This is a very unusual artist. I mean, because he did his own mixing most of the time. I mean, he had people there, but he was really in charge of the whole process all the way down the line. In fact, so much so that I would get tapes in or mixes of his where he'd been working at on one side of the board, mixing it, and the thing would be like 3 dB lopsided. The right channel would be 3 dB louder than the left, because he wasn't even looking at the meters. He was just mixing and putting it where it sounded good to him, but he was way over on the right side of the board or something. So I mean, there were a lot of things I had to correct in that way, and there's always some adjustment to do to make things sound consistent. If you do 10, 12 tunes over a period of time, there's going to be little touch-ups here and there to make the things kind of sound like they follow each other and they kind of tell a story and so forth. But they should all be comfortable when you listen down from tune to tune. Yeah, so that's one of our jobs too as mastering engineers, is that we're trying to make these things flow along and feel comfortable from tune to tune, but not too much alike, because then it gets boring. So, but you don't want to make the listener uncomfortable. As each tune starts, it should fit somewhat in there, so that they don't feel they have to get up and change their EQ and their level on their sound system. But that's the old album mentality. I mean, there's also a lot of this just singles nowadays, and so then you don't know. You just make an educated guess on the kind of level that should be out there, that's going to be on all these things like Spotify and iTunes and on the radio or wherever it's going to be. You can't make it for any one place.
Yes.
Something like that.
I
mean, look, way back when I was doing the Carpenter stuff, I remember they put out a single, and they were upset because the radio station sped it up. And so they had me do another mastering, and I slowed it down. And then what did they do? Since they were so worried about them, they played the slowed down version. And so it was wrong again. So I mean, you just have to make it a good experience musically. And some places it won't sound as good as you want it to. You're not going to be able to make it sound good on everything, but you want it to sound reasonably good on everything. That's the area you want to be in. You want to be in an area where it works fairly well on just about anything, that it's not going to be too far off anywhere. Now that's an interesting area to try to get into, but it's if you have a good set of monitors, you get to learn those monitors in such a way that about the way it should sound on those monitors, and also from all the feedback you get from your clients, and when you hear it on the radio, and when you hear it wherever you hear it, you'll be able to tell if you're like pretty much in the right place for most everything you do.
All right. John Gorham. Hello, Bernie. Thanks for presenting here today. Can you give us a pre-mastering checklist for mix engineers?
Pre-mastering. Well,
Other than how hot should I send you a mix?
Well, no, I understand that. Yeah. Well,
I have an answer to.
Well, yeah, I think one thing that's kind of valuable to me actually is, I mean, all of them as a mixer, and from what I understand, talking to all the mixers, they're working with a client. The client wants to hear it kind of like compared to what they're listening to that's been mastered. So a lot of times they just throw a plug-in in and make it really loud. The mix. I mean, they got a good mix, and they just throw a plug-in in and they make it loud, so that it kind of sounds like everything out there as far as level. And but they're not really compensating a lot of times for everything that happens when you put the plug-in in, because it changes it a lot. It changes the mix as well as the sound, and the openness and the airiness or the detail of it. I mean, it just changes a lot of things, but they try to hype it up a little bit. I would prefer that they didn't do that when they give it to me, but I wouldn't mind hearing what they've been giving the artist and the producer, because I should be somewhere in the neighborhood of that level at least, but I just want to make it better, cleaner, better quality, and so forth, and retain a lot of the openness and dynamics and quality of the original mix, even after it's gone through processing. And that requires like a certain amount of readjustment and manipulation of the sound to maintain some of the really good things that were in the original mix.
I have a question for you on that.
Yeah.
So, other than volumes, because I do the same thing, I'll listen to the pre-mastered, louder mix just to see where they are level-wise.
Yeah, because
but do you listen to that for sonic signatures, like, they like the way this bottom end thing is happening, or maybe the top mid-range energy they like of that?
Well, and here's what. Yeah, but the interesting thing that happens with things like that is you have to be, you can't be completely prejudiced against stuff like that, because there are things, even when they're not right, there are certain aspects of what happened when it went through this process that you might like. And you're going, well, I do like what they did. I like what it did to the voice, or I like what it did to the bottom end, but I don't like what it did to the top end. It's almost like you're working off that, and then you're like doing this new kind of version that retains the good things about that one, but also things that you think are going to be better than what that one had. So it's a combination of things, but all of these things kind of feed into trying to find really the best way to present this tune. And you really have to be honest with yourself. I mean, I had a client years ago, Andy Norell. He was a steel drum player of all things. He could play bebop jazz on steel drums. His family had been in the oil business in Jamaica or something, and he got into steel drums. But I made a lot of albums with him, and he got to know my console so well that he knew the equalizer as well. And we have like about a choice of up to 36 frequencies or so on console, and we have a double board so that we can compare at the same levels and so forth, and different EQs. And so we would get into this thing where I would say, okay, Andy, look, why don't you EQ it on the A board, and I'll EQ it on the B board, and we'll see who wins. Now, if you can get to that point, if you're secure enough to get to that point, you're really there. Because what you're really telling him is that, look, I don't care. I'm going to do the best I can to get the most out of this music, but you might have some comments too that would help it. Don't think you know everything. And you have to be honest with yourself and with him. If he finds something that you like better, you have to admit it. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. You don't always find everything that's going to make it better. And sometimes it's good to have that. I like to have feedback from my clients. I'll have somebody say to me, gee, why don't we put a little 5K in there? And I'll think to myself, no, that's not going to work. That doesn't make sense to me at all. And but I've learned my lesson before too. It's like, oh, well, maybe I better try this because somehow he's hearing this. And I'll put it in and I'll go, my God, that sounds better. So, don't think you know everything. Don't think because just you're the mastering engineer that you're supposed to solve all the problems. It's a joint effort. It's good to have feedback. It's good to have other opinions, and then you try them. They don't always work. I mean, a lot of times what's in your mind you never get, but you're trying to get there to that ideal place.
All right, Benjamin, thank you for the kudos on the mustache. Hello, Bernie. What frequency ranges are crucial to get right in a pop mix or master so the track sounds good on most consumer devices? Thank you, from Paris. Pop mix frequencies.
It's kind of like what I was talking about earlier. I was talking that, it has to sound like everything is pretty much there on just an average size speaker, just like a small near field speaker. That's why I was saying you don't want to go too far on the extremes and so forth, because those are areas that only big sound systems can get. And you still want it to get the message across even on smaller speakers. So, but anything you do all the way in there from about 100 on up to 10K, or 12K even for some speakers and so forth, is probably going to be useful. The main thing you don't want though is small speakers. There's a characteristic of a lot of small speakers. The main thing you don't want to have too much of is what we were talking about earlier, 300 cycles. They tend to sound, small speakers almost start to sound like megaphones. It's kind of this kind of thing. And that kind of sound is very unnatural. And you want it to sound linear. And so if anything, you want to make sure that you don't have all that, hollowness that's up around 300-400 cycles, if you can avoid it. And you try to keep it so that most of your energy is below that, but not much below it, because then you're out of the range of small speakers. But I think that area right in there that we were talking about much earlier is extremely important to keep that thing so that because it'll jump right out of the speakers if you have too much of those frequencies, it won't do it. You won't get the presence, you won't get the detail, and that's what those systems a lot of times lack, is detail and presence, and it has to really come out at you.
I'm interested in the answer to this question.
Okay.
Simon Lancelot. How is it to manage a team of staff engineers compared to being self-employed, and how does it feel to have those engineers kind of wearing your name?
Hey, no, I'm at a place in my life where I want them to do that.
I want to wear your name.
Yeah, I need to spend more time in Italy, and get more espresso. I'm an espresso nut, and that's my other passion. And, if I could spend more time in Italy, that'd be great. And everybody in the studio would be, and I have good engineers, and I want good engineers.
I'm a good engineer.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, well, you're one of the.
I'm done. See you.
One of the few that's really excelled and really figured it all out. It's an ongoing process. But I think that it's that kind of feeling that we're all trying to do the same thing, and we all honestly want to help each other come up with a good product. We're not competing that way. The main thing is we're serving that product. And so a lot of times I'll even ask somebody, what do you think of this? Or they'll ask me, I've got this problem. I don't know how to do this, or I don't know how, I can't get this out. And I think it needs it, or whatever it is that, and we kind of work on it together a lot of times. But I think I want everybody to be successful. I want everybody to, I'm at that point where to me, it doesn't matter anymore. I just want to help people be the best they can be.
Good answer. Leonardo Morales. So knowing that mixing has come so far, what do you think is the connection now? Perfect sounding material versus emotional musical? We keep referencing old good music.
Well, and that's the thing that's difficult nowadays, because, we can do so much to the audio that we can strangle the life out of it, and it won't sound like it came even from a human being. You have to remember that with all this computer stuff that we do now, it's great. You can do a lot with it, but boy, it won't sound like a human being made it. It won't sound natural. You can get all the pitch right. You can get the tempos right. You can do this right. You can do that. You can do all this stuff with the computer, and you can be precise about a lot of things. And it used to even happen in analog. The rough mix, everybody liked better than the one that everybody labored over to get everything just perfect, what they thought was perfect. And so the basic thing is that music is basically just an emotional expression of the human experience. And if you interfere with that, if it doesn't come across and connect with you emotionally, and you're a human being, you should be able to respond to it. You have to find the things that make you respond more, because it's the same thing as anybody else. All other human beings are going to listen to it. That's the message you're trying to get across, and you're trying to find a way to get it across in the best way. So you don't want to get too much in your head and just get it. I've always said this, that a lot of these engineers, they've got their heads so buried in the computer, they're not even hearing what it's doing to the music emotionally, and how it's actually sometimes destroying the emotional connection of the music. So you really have to keep that in mind. And you even have to get up and walk around for a while sometimes and clear your head, and then come back in and listen to it as a listener, not as an engineer who's trying to find little details and things that are wrong with it. It's got to speak to you emotionally. So whatever that takes, you've got to find it.
All right. I like these questions. If you could keep Sansimo, if you could give your younger self a tip at the beginning of your career with your current experience, which tip would that be?
Well, if I think about the way I began and how I can't, because I got in the business at the best time. I was really fortunate. I got into the business just when mastering became a creative part of the business. It's way back in 1966. And because, mastering engineers were called that because they just got a master disc. That was all they did. They didn't even adjust the sound. And the company that I went to work for, my first job, was a small jazz label that had built a lot of their own equipment so that they could manipulate the sound. And all of a sudden I was able to develop a big reputation because I could adjust the sound. And so I really was fortunate that way. And then, of course, shortly after that, people like Doug Sachs, Mastering Lab, and a lot of people started getting into where they would adjust the sound. They would manipulate the sound for the client. And the clients wanted that because they didn't want to have to go back in and redo something in the studio. They wanted to do it right in the mastering room. So I was fortunate that way. But, at a certain point, I always use this example. You don't want to. You have to remember that you're only as good as your last project in a way, or each new project is a challenge, and you have to be there, open-minded, not thinking that you know everything, and that you're so good that whatever you come up with, they're going to like. That isn't so true. At least you learn that. And I remember that I was working with this one client. It was in the days of disc cutting, and I was flying pretty high. I had a big reputation, and I was doing a lot of big artists and so forth.
You still do, and you still are.
Yeah, and we were doing this disc, and this was the guy that did later on did Bruce Springsteen, a lot of big people. But we were doing a very complex mastering. I only had one board. I didn't have a double board that I could switch back and forth from the tape. This was all on tape. So everything, when you cut a disc, you can't stop the disc. You have to cut 4, 5, 6 tunes in a row. And if you have adjustments to do, which this first board that I had, or one of these boards that I had, it only had one bank of EQ. So in the space between the tunes, you had to do all the changes. And so we had this setup to where we had a very makeshift kind of VSO that we were adjusting the speed of the tape. You had to push the button in order to make the spread on the disc. There was all these things, and I was going to cut the disc, and we had gone through it and done written down all of the stuff we wanted to do on this, say the second tune. It was the second tune on the album. It had all of these changes from the first tune. So in other words, going from the first tune to the second tune, there were 19 moves. I counted them later on. And, you know, I had been doing a lot of fancy EQ stuff in the spreads and stuff and so forth, but this was pretty challenging. This was a lot of stuff. In fact, it took me 5 tries to do it because I had to memorize everything, because right in that 3 seconds of the spread, I had to just move and not even think about what I was doing. I had to have it kind of memorized. And but when I got to that 5th one, I got through the spread, did all the moves, the VSO right at the right time so you couldn't hear it, all of this stuff. And I was patting myself on the back. I was feeling so good, I blew the next spread. And I had to do it again. I had to start over again. You know, so, you know, it's kind of a good example of be careful, because don't think you know it all or you've done the greatest thing in the world, because the next thing might throw you way off. You know, you're going to be humbled.
Be humble.
Yeah, be humble. Be humble. There's always something new to learn, you know.
All right. Flo Siller, how do you keep fresh creatively during long and consecutive sessions?
Well, I don't listen really loud. I listen at a good listening level. I mean, one where somebody would be actively listening, but not trying to hype themselves, you know, because a lot of mixers, I don't know how they do it, because they listen really too loud for me. But, you know, and I even I even say that to, I even talk about this on my seminars and so forth. You know, when I get people that come in the studio, the thing is, they've been in the studio doing these mixes, and every new person that walks in the room, they boost the level, you know, to get excitement, to impress people. But and that's why I call mastering the sobering part of the business, because when they come in with me, it's like now they know that they can't do that. When it goes out on the market, they can't do that. They can't be there where everybody's listening or whoever and raise the level of their record, and just make it more impressive, because there's a certain kind of kinetic or emotional thing that happens when you just listen to something loud. But it comes down to they get kind of quiet in here, because it's like, God, what do we really have? How does it fit? How does it stand up against everything out there? Because now it's going to be just laying right down next to everything else. And how is it going to perform? And so this is the real important part of mastering, and of even the levels you listen at. You want to listen at a nice level as if somebody was actively listening, not as a background thing. But that way you don't get as fatigued. And I think you need to take a break now and then, especially if you've got an area that you're having trouble with. You're not getting, you know, it can be better than it is, and you haven't found something that really makes you feel good about it. It's better to stop and take a walk around the studio, talk to some people, whatever. You come back in, and many times you come back in, you start it up, and you go, oh, I hear what it needs, because now you got fresh ears again. You know, you've kind of cleared your mind a little bit, and then it shows up a little more, or you think of the thing that will fix it. So you have to. You don't want to be too anxious, you know, because you know I've done that too, where it's like cutting the legs off of a table to make it not teeter-totter and so forth. It's like I've gotten to the point where I've been EQing something, and you add a little bottom. You say, well, yeah, but if I've added a little bottom, now I need a little top to compensate for that, and now I need to do a little bit of this to compensate for that. And you're going down, blah, 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 blah. And you go down, and you've done all this stuff, and you go, well, now let's see, what did the original sound like? And it's like, oh my God, what have I done? The original is way better. Yeah, it's like I'm just like going up and down, up and down, up and down, and I've added all this distortion from every equalizer in the studio's in or something. You know, I've added all these things that really we don't want, and all that stuff's additive. You know, distortion's an additive thing. You do one little thing, and you don't notice anything, but there's something happening. It's not quite as clean. So, but you don't notice it right away, and then you do another thing, and you do another thing, and you still don't notice it next to the last thing you did. And then all of a sudden, you should be able to always refer back to what you originally started with. And now you need to find out was it worth it? These changes that you made, are you gaining more than you lost? Because you're going to lose certain things in whatever you do. Whenever you're working on something, putting it through some other piece of equipment, you're going to degrade the sound. So you better be doing something that's going to be better than the losses that were involved in what you did.
It's a compromise.
It is. It is.
Which
but
compromises
but again, you're going back to try to get the most out of both ends of it. You're trying to manipulate it in such a way that it's musically a better communication, better experience, but you still want to make it sound real. You know, you want to make it. You don't want it to sound electronic, mechanical.
You ready for a political question? Not real politics.
Well, we got a lot. We could talk a lot about politics in the U.S.
Okay. Let's see what you say. With Kinky Pink asks, Bernie, how do you feel about online mastering services such as Lander for those that are on a tight budget?
Well, I have no idea. I don't see how that can be done, but I mean, it probably at least makes it loud. But the only thing is, there's so many other things that come into play when you're doing the fundamental thing, which is always level nowadays when it comes to pop music. I mean, I've had people call me up and say, God, I don't know. I sent it to this online mastering thing, and I don't know what they're doing to it. He says, but all the verses are real loud and the choruses are the same level as the verses. And it's like, well, of course, it was just mechanically through algorithms and so forth, just making everything loud. So it was like all out of proportion. So I don't see how that could work, but and it's not that there might not be something that it might do something on, but I mean, I certainly wouldn't trust it, because you really have to do a lot of EQ compensation usually when you're trying to bring these things up to a competitive level.
All right. Hello, Bernie and Mike.
Yeah.
I want to get better at mastering. This is a question I should have asked you like 20 years ago. I want to get better at mastering, and I want some advice. Which books do you recommend?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't even know if there's any.
I learned everything sitting at that console.
I don't think there's many. I don't know if there's any books on this subject. That's the interesting thing.
And I've been in as a master.
Yeah, I think they have some now, but I think there's some fundamental things that you can do, and you can actually develop it yourself. I don't see any reason why you can't. Because if you have the fundamental thing of knowing that you're really trying to make this thing affect you emotionally, you're trying to do something to make this music communicate with you emotionally. So that part can't teach that. It's like Bruce Swedien says. I can tell anyone anything I ever did on a Michael Jackson album, where I put the microphones, everything I did in the studio, everything. But I can't tell them how to mix. There's no way. That's a sense and a kind of feeling and a direction that you can't really just say. You can't make it a mechanical thing. It's all feeling, and it's connecting. It's man and machine. It's like manipulating the sound to get to that place where it's starting to really communicate with you and make your emotion connect with your emotions. Now, I've often said that, it's one thing that I even learned at a very, very early age is because when you're younger, you know everything. And so, but at an early age, I was a little bit of a snob. I'm an old bebop jazz person and classical person. And, but as I got more and more into mastering and working with different kinds of projects and so forth, I realized that, you can't be prejudiced, or else you're not going to be able to connect with it musically or emotionally. You're not going to be able to connect well so that you can manipulate the sound and know if you're getting anywhere. You have to know if you're improving the experience when you manipulate the sound or whatever you do to the sound. You have to know emotionally. What's that? Something went up on the screen. But anyway, this can be developed because but what you need to do is you need to be not prejudiced. You need to be able to connect with any kind of music. There's no reason why you can't, because we're human beings. We're all, and everybody's just got different points of view of expressing the same emotion. So because of that, you're a human being too. You might not particularly like polka music, but the person that made that did, and you want to make it sound more effective. It's the same thing. They're expressing a certain types of emotion that's their point of view. But you should be able to get on that same wavelength and do something that's beneficial for that music. So if you're not prejudiced, you should be able to deal with any kind of music. And so if you can be open-minded about it, then when you start manipulating the sound, you'll be able to tell if you're doing anything beneficial. So I think that what you need to do is listen to a lot of different music, or all the pop stuff that's out there, and those really great sounding things will reveal themselves to you if you're open to it. You'll know what a great hip-hop record should sound like. You'll know what a great R&B record should sound like, or just a straight pop record. Just listen to the best ones, and then figure out. Then you have to have a little practice, fooling around with projects, or a lot of practice. And how am I going to make this thing at least come close to that thing that I idealized? So you've got these ideals in your mind about the best of this and the best of that and the best of that, and you have to learn your system, and you have to have the tools around you to manipulate the sound to get the sound that you're looking for. And so it's a trial and error thing. I don't know if you can. I think all I can recommend is that you have the tools at hand, and you have a knowledge of what the best of any kind of music sounds like. And you can even adapt to the music that you don't know that well. It's just that you know that it's an emotional thing that you're looking for, and then you just start manipulating the sound and try to make it come more alive and more connective, and more so that there's that connection, that emotional connection, is easier to make with that music.
All right, so I think the thing on the screen was hey, you guys are doing great. And do you want one more question? You want to feel?
You can have another question, yeah.
All right, this is going to be kind of a big question, and maybe a good one to wrap up on, because it's from a mastering studio.
Oh, okay.
In Germany.
Do they have a job?
Somebody hire this guy.
Yeah, I need a vacation. I'll work there for 6 months.
So it's a two-parter, and I'll just lay it all out, and you can answer it however you want. Soundation Studio Mastering. Can you tell us something about your analog chain? You are playing back from a Lavery DA and capture with a Lavery Gold, ? How important is the soft clipping feature on the A to D for your work? And also, can you talk a little about your custom mastering console? Are the filters active or passive? Thank you very much. I really like your work. Best from Germany, Thomas.
Well, of course, the thing about our system is that, you know, we have 2 full-time tech guys here, and they're really as good as they get, and very experienced as well. And we do a lot of hot rodding here. I don't think there's anything in here that is stock to begin with. I mean, even the Laveries are rebuilt by us. We make them better. And even the analog clock, we use the analog atomic clock, but we even made that better. We found a better crystal than the one they put in. And of course, these are all done by listening tests, because you can't always be sure that what should be better is better. It's all comes down to listening, though. Everything is down to listening. We try this piece of wire, or we try that, or we try something new. We always have to compare to what we had before. You can't assume anything, because there's no way of measuring what we're hearing. The measurements we make in electronics are simple. Intermodulation distortion, harmonic distortion, but those are very simple measurements. They do not tell you what a system will do on complex information. In fact, sometimes I even recommend that listen to something with a lot of distortion and see how well your system passes it, because that's a really complex signal. How faithful can it reproduce that distortion? So, which is kind of an ironic, funny thing to say, but it always comes down to your ears, for one thing. Now, our whole console is custom hand-built by us. It's all discrete. We don't use chips or anything. It's all discrete. We even put together our own wiring system. The interesting thing about it is this is a little bit different, and it doesn't work in a lot of places. But we built this studio from the ground up with a special grounding system, and so the whole system is single-ended. So and we really believe in it if you can avoid ground loops and so forth. So we don't have that problem because we have a really beefy grounding system. But all of this whole system is straight through. We can put in outboard equipment, but the basic system is basically almost hardwired all the way through. The equalizers, compressors, all of this stuff goes right through. We have no transformers, no differential amplifiers. We have none of that kind of stuff that isolates anything from anything, and that's why we have to have a good grounding system, because you can't do that on a lot of systems. You have to have transformers, you have to have ways of isolating different sections and so forth, or else you're going to get ground loops. But like I said, we've spent years with this system, and we have it simplified in such a way that only the frequencies. See, we have it's all modular. So, like even the equalizers, we only use what's in. We even use only the frequencies that we're using. So we punch those in, and so that the signal path never has any more electronics than absolutely necessary to get what we want. So we know that as good as our line amps are and all of that, they're not perfect. Nothing is. It all affects the sound somewhat, and it adds up. So we're always trying to avoid any more electronics than we need to have. We don't want any redundancy, anything like that. And like the Lavery, yeah, we use a combination of things a lot of times. We have an analog equalizer, a compressor. And actually the compressor, we like the way the old SSL analog compressor and limiter worked, but we didn't like the sound. We thought it was pretty poor sound. So we kept the parameters, only we sped it up. We've got 0.05 attack and release if we want, but it's completely rebuilt with our power supplies. our line amps, and it has special VCAs in it that you can't even buy anymore. They were the cleanest ones, but they were very expensive. But when you're building systems like these, where you're going to be it's your part of your sound, and you're going to want the absolute best quality, because that's what we're all about. We want to at least start with almost exactly what came out of the studio without any modification, going through the complete system and into our computer and back out. We even rebuild the computer and license the software. All the wiring, everything is all done in-house. So it's a unique system that way, but we're old audiophiles. And that's why we have a big reputation with audiophile people. We do a lot of disc cutting for all the audiophile labels and so forth. So we can like take everything out, and we can have like almost a signal path that has nothing in its way. Or we can just do limit. We can set it up so we're only doing level, but it goes right into, like, say, back at our cutting system, we can go right into the cutting system. We can go right into the cutting system right out of the D to A processor. If we want to do a digital transfer, we can go right into the cutting system direct. So, and we win a lot of shootouts that way, because, again, no matter what you do, I don't care how good it is, even our stuff. Ours is great, but when you take it out of the circuit, it's better. So if we can avoid anything, we would. But you do need to manipulate the sound, and you do need to have some control over the sound, because it's just going to make it a better recording and a better musical experience. I mean, I've had audiophiles tell me, "You EQ'd that? Oh, it's got to be bad." They just have this prejudice against anything electronic. Well, if it's a bad recording and it's poorly balanced, you're not going to like it musically. You're not going to like it musically. Hey, and it might be cleaner. It probably is if you don't do anything to it, but it's going to be a terrible musical experience. So you want to manipulate the sound the least amount, but to get what you want, but not have a lot of electronics to do it. So that's our philosophy anyway.
Well, I think that's it.
So get out your soldering gun.
I personally want to thank Bernie for hiring me and providing this great studio. The Mix with the Masters guys, thank you for having us. And for all the questions and people that follow us mastering people, appreciate you a ton too.
Yeah, it was great. It was fun to do, even though I don't get a direct feedback, but I think I just feel that there's people out there, so that's good enough for me.
Get to work.
Yeah. Yeah, well, hey, just you just have to keep yourself sensitive to the music. Like Bruce Woodine said, his motto is, hey, we're serving the music. We're serving the music. We don't know everything. We want that music to be what's really speaking to people. So just keep that in mind.
Well, there you go.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Sure,
guys.
thanks.
Thank you, Bernie. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.